Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Rita Politte. On December 4, 1998, Michael Politte was at home in the small town of Hopewell, Missouri, United States. At the time, his mother, Rita, was working at a local bar. While she was working her shift, Michael was home alone. Feeling bored, he decided to ride his bike to the nearest store, a supermarket where he often met his friends. When he got there, he ran into his 15-year-old friend, Josh Sansu. Michael invited Josh over and Josh agreed, and Josh spent the night at Michael's house. They passed the time playing chess and video games while they waited. When Michael's mother came home from work, he saw the headlights flashing on the sunroof and realized she was home. After Rita got home, she told the children to go to bed. Michael then woke up near dawn. In his room, he was lying in bed and noticed a strange smoke coming from the crack in the door. Josh, who was sleeping on the floor near Michael's bed, suddenly woke up and looked at him in fear. Michael started calling for his mother, but there was no response. Tensions escalated, and the children began to panic. When they left Michael's room to go to their mother's room, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Josh and Michael saw Rita's legs covered in blood. Their mother's upper body was on fire. Rita was engulfed in flames up to her waist. Without hesitation, Michael ran to get water to put out the fire, calling out to her in the hope that she would answer, but it was too late. Meanwhile, Josh ran to a neighbor's house for help because they did not have a cell phone. By 6:30 a.m., emergency services arrived and firefighters began to put out the fire. After extinguishing the fire, Michael called his sister, Crystal, to share the heartbreaking news. When police arrived at the scene, they found a young man sitting on his bed, in a state of shock. He was unable to stand up and struggled to speak clearly. The horrific sight and smell of burning flesh haunted him forever. Police quickly began an investigation. It was clear that the victim had suffered a traumatic brain injury. She had been struck in the head with a blunt object before being set on fire. The fire chief examined both the body and the crime scene. He quickly determined that gasoline or fuel had been used to start the fire. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the scene but found no murder weapon. Police quickly suspected the son of killing his mother. Rita's death was motivated by cruelty and hatred towards her. Rita was only 40 years old at the time. In addition to Michael, she had two adult daughters, Crystal and Melanie, both in their early 20s. Rita's family lived in Hopewell, Missouri, a town where residents felt safe enough to leave their homes and cars unattended. It seemed like a peaceful haven, untouched by the violence of the outside world. Sadly, even in such places, terrible crimes can still happen. The town had a friendly atmosphere and the crime rate was so low that most locals often left their doors open at night. Michael's mother, Rita, left the door open without considering the potential danger, which may explain why there was no forced entry. The police's attention was now focused on Rita's son, Michael. Michael's parents, Edward and Rita, met when they were young and eventually married. Their first children were twins named Crystal and Melanie. The girls had vivid memories of their father's cruelty. Although Rita loved Edward very much, he often cheated on her and eventually became abusive, both emotionally and physically. Unable to bear this treatment any longer, Rita decided to get the police involved. The children often witnessed their father's violent outbursts, which later led to behavioral problems, especially in Michael. About a year before the massacre, the family dynamics worsened significantly. During this time, Michael witnessed Edward physically attack Rita. He knocked her to the ground with several blows and began to strangle her. Michael and his sisters were terrified for their mother's life. Fortunately, the children managed to distract Edward, allowing Rita to escape from his grip. Following this incident, the family faced many challenges. In the summer of 1998, after over 20 years of marriage, Rita filed for divorce. Edward sought joint custody of their children, but the kids did not want to live with him. Rita chose not to escalate the situation. When filing for divorce, she cited her husband's infidelity but did not mention the years of abuse she endured. As a result, the court awarded shared custody, forcing the children to visit their father, whom they despised. Michael and Josh were taken to the sheriff's office. Although the teens were clearly not ready to talk, the police began an immediate investigation. On the way to the police station, the patrol car driver noticed Michael making strange comments and showing little emotion. Although the body had not been identified, Michael insisted that it was his mother, since there was no one else in the house. The police, ignoring the possibility that Michael might be in shock and not fully comprehending what he was saying, became increasingly suspicious of his involvement in the incident. At the police station, Michael underwent a voice stress test, which is also known as voice stress analysis. After the test, the officers informed him that he had failed, but this could be attributed to the trauma he experienced after witnessing his mother's death. Furthermore, voice stress tests are controversial and their results are often considered unreliable, usually not accepted as evidence in court. The police also took Michael's shoes, and specially trained dogs detected traces of flammable substances on them, suggesting they were used to ignite Rita's body after the murder. The Michael seemed to be attempting to hide his actions. Michael and Josh both claimed they had no idea what had happened. They were questioned without a lawyer present. According to the teenagers, they had been in Michael's room for some time, sleeping, and had not heard anything that had happened. Michael claimed that he had been in bed and had only come out when he smelled smoke. However, the police did not believe their testimony and the questioning became increasingly tense. Both boys remained in custody. Josh's mother went to the police station to support him as much as she could, while Michael's father chose not to support him and did not appear. On the second day, Josh made a statement on video camera in the presence of his mother and several police at once. He explained that he was not sure what had happened, but that he had woken up in the middle of the night just before the fire and found his friend Michael missing. He also admitted that he was fed up with the situation. The police took this as a contradiction to Michael's statement, which meant that Michael was lying. Josh's statement essentially confirmed the police's suspicions of Michael's involvement in his mother's murder. On December 7, 1998, Michael was arrested for the murder of his mother, shocking both him and everyone who knew him. Michael believed that it was a misunderstanding and was confident that he would be proven innocent and released. He maintained his innocence, but this did not convince the police. Michael insisted that he would never harm his mother, whom he loved dearly. Although they had had some recent conflicts, he hoped to gain support from his uncle and aunt, who lived nearby. His uncle, a politician, along with his sisters, sided with him, believing that he could not have harmed his mother. They believed that the investigation should focus on their father Edward. However, Edward was cleared of the crime because he had an alibi. Many people noticed problems in the relationship between Michael and his mother. The family struggled after the divorce. Financial difficulties affected both mother and children, and Michael, a schoolboy, faced challenges during this difficult transition. The police became suspicious because of Michael's behavior, which was hardly exemplary. In 7th grade, he began skipping school frequently. Teachers were concerned that he might not advance to the next grade due to his behavioral problems. About 10 months before the tragic events, Michael's behavior became significantly worse, and witnesses reported that he had threatened Rita. This led to Michael being taken to a psychiatric clinic. However, doctors found no underlying problems and attributed his behavior to puberty and the stress of his parents' divorce. Michael later admitted that threatening his mother was the biggest mistake of his life. Unfortunately, he could no longer apologize or take back his words. Many troubled teens act in similar ways, but not all of them go astray. Michael was not a criminal. He did not associate with bad influences or get into trouble that would make him a potential suspect. Although he denied any wrongdoing, the police were still fully convinced that he was guilty. Years passed as Michael waited for his Supreme Court hearing. During this time, he was in prison and was deemed extremely dangerous, so he was not eligible for bail. Just before the trial started, the prosecutor offered Michael a plea deal for manslaughter. If he accepted, he could face a maximum of 15 years in prison, but he turned it down. Michael maintained his innocence, stating he should not be punished for a crime committed by someone else. He believed the only person capable of harming his mother so brutally was his father, Edward, but no one paid attention to his claims. In January 2002, Michael, who had just turned 17, appeared in court. The prosecutor presented evidence gathered during the investigation, including shoes that had traces of flammable substances used to burn the body. Tests confirmed that gasoline was the substance used. The prosecution argued that the young man had a tendency towards arson. Multiple witnesses reported seeing him play with fire and intentionally destroying objects for entertainment. A friend of the defendant stated that a few hours before Rita returned from work, they had used gasoline to ignite some trash on the railroad tracks. Upon inspecting the crime scene, police found a canister with a small amount of flammable liquid left inside. The defendant's lawyer explained that although gasoline had splashed on Michael's shoes while they were playing with fire, this did not prove he was responsible for the fire in the house. The defendant did not kill his mother or set fire to her body. From the prosecutor, the jury heard about Michael's behavioral issues and possible mental health concerns. However, these were not confirmed during assessments. Before his mother, Rita, died, the young man's threats to her were considered key evidence that he was involved in the murder. Michael's initial belief that he would not go to prison began to wane. The prosecution argued that Michael attempted to end his life about a month after the murder, citing guilt for harming a loved one. A fellow inmate claimed to have heard Michael confess, but he was never brought to the stand to testify. Michael's defense maintained his innocence, but as he down and regained his composure, the jury began to suspect that he was hiding something. A key piece of evidence for the prosecution was a video of Josh's testimony from 3 years ago. Interestingly, Josh himself was not invited to take part in the case proceedings. From the start, Michael's defense seemed uncertain. It appeared they either lacked important information about their client or didn't believe he was innocent. The defense focused on the absence of direct evidence from the prosecution, which was actually true. No murder weapon or significant evidence was discovered. Additionally, there were no bloodstains or other traces on the Michael's clothing that suggested an attack had occurred. There were also no injuries that indicated he had struggled with the victim. The prosecution's hearings for the case lasted 3 days, after which the jury deliberated on the verdict. Initially, they struggled to reach a decision because the case was highly controversial. Eventually, they agreed that Michael was guilty of second-degree murder. Since he refused to cooperate with the prosecution, he received the maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Michael was stunned by the verdict. He accused the court of wrongful conviction and viewed himself as a victim, but he was sent to prison in Missouri regardless. No one paid attention to his claims anymore. This high-profile case drew the interest of several human rights activists who believed in Michael's innocence. However, over time, their interest in the case waned. The state correctional system is known for its extreme cruelty. From the moment he was imprisoned, Michael encountered the harsh realities of local prisons, which are among the most dangerous in the United States. On his very first day, he had a fight with his cellmate, Rome, and was sexually assaulted by prison staff. He realized that to survive in this environment, he had to adapt quickly, otherwise, he might not make it to his appeal hearing. Desperate to live freely again, he was determined to navigate this difficult phase of his life. He maintained that his conviction was due to a mistake. Despite feeling out of place in prison, Michael chose to alter his behavior by becoming more aggressive and getting multiple tattoos, as this was viewed positively by other inmates. This was his way of protecting himself. He repeatedly reached out to his father for help, but Edward did not support him. After 10 years of imprisonment, Michael's situation began to improve. During this time, he contacted the human rights organization Innocence, which advocates for the rights of those wrongfully convicted. The young man's case quickly drew the interest of several lawyers who thoroughly reviewed the case materials. They identified clear flaws in the investigation and the prosecutor's office. Human rights activists believed that Michael's inconsistent statements made after his mother's death were a result of his fragile mental state and the trauma he had endured. Furthermore, it was evident that he was still a minor at that time. Given that his mother's skull was severely damaged, it was unlikely that a 14-year-old boy had the physical capability to cause such an injury to an adult. It was also suspicious that Michael's friend Josh didn't hear any sounds of a fight, suggesting that it likely never happened. Rita lost consciousness after just one blow from someone much larger and older than a 14-year-old boy. Furthermore, the fire chief's belief that the body was burned with gasoline was questionable. By the time emergency services arrived, the fire had already been put out, and any fuel had been consumed. The prosecutor's case relied solely on the dog's reactions, which indicated the presence of something that could start a fire. However, it's clear that the dogs couldn't accurately identify what they detected. The defense attorneys sought to challenge the key piece of evidence against the teenager: traces of gasoline found on his shoes. They argued that the testing method used to examine the soles was based on chemical reagents, which they believed was not reliable enough. They claimed this method could misidentify traces of gasoline as coming from certain polymers used in shoe production. Eventually, even the state crime lab supported this argument, noting that solvents and adhesives used in Michael's sneakers had chemical compositions very similar to gasoline. However, this information was not commonly known in the 1990s. Additionally, there was a video recording of Josh's statements. He had multiple conversations with police officers both before and after his friend's conviction. He mentioned that when he was 15, he endured lengthy interrogations by police, which were very tiring. Josh clarified that waking up in the middle of the night did not necessarily mean that Michael was harming Rita at that time. It was possible that his friend simply went to the bathroom. Ultimately, Josh expressed uncertainty about whether he could have seen an empty bed in the dark, suggesting that Michael might have been lying underneath it. Josh initially maintained Michael's innocence. However, the police created a misleading story using conversations taken out of context. Recordings from the interrogation revealed that Josh believed Michael was guilty. Josh later recanted his initial statement, revealing that police had threatened him into a plea deal to avoid being incarcerated with Michael. As a result, Josh did not testify at trial. Instead, the prosecution presented a video and audio recording of his testimony that showed potential involvement, without bringing Josh to trial. Michael's attorneys argued that this was because Josh could have contradicted key evidence that the prosecution relied on. Had the defense attorney had the opportunity to speak to Josh, the outcome may have been different. Following the incident, the media focused on securing Michael's release from prison by gathering evidence that disproved the prosecution's allegations. Many people close to Rita believed that Michael's father, Edward, was the real killer. Edward had a strong motive for the crime. After their divorce, the court ordered him to pay a significant amount of alimony to his ex-wife, which severely affected his finances. Many people attested to Edward's poor character and the way he treated his wife. During the divorce proceedings, he openly threatened Rita, saying that she would not live long enough to receive alimony. However, when Edward Politte was questioned by police after the murder, he gave an alibi, he had been more than 100 kilometers away from his home during the time of the crime, and witnesses corroborated his testimony. Therefore, any suspicion against Edward was dismissed. From the beginning, Michael insisted that his father was the only one capable of planning Rita's murder, suspecting that Edward was working with others to commit the crime. This theory was further supported by his legal team. Attention turned to Edward's brother Johnny. Interviews were conducted with neighbors and Johnny's wife, who testified that he returned home around 6 a.m. on the day of the murder and then disappeared overnight without giving a clear reason for his absence. Neighbors also reported seeing his pickup truck near the Rita's home late that night. During the investigation, police discovered a crowbar among Johnny's belongings, which appeared to be the instrument used to inflict the fatal injuries on Rita. The crowbar was sent for examination and was tentatively identified as the murder weapon. Despite this evidence, the prosecution maintained that Michael was guilty. His attorneys filed an appeal. They brought all their supporting evidence to the appeal. Unfortunately, Missouri's judicial system is notoriously strict, making it difficult to overturn a verdict or reopen the case. From the start, the court imposed obstacles on Michael's legal team, leading to the dismissal of their appeal. As the legal battle continued, it seemed that Michael's lawyers were in trouble. Then, in 2021, something important happened. Missouri passed a new law that gave a second chance to juvenile offenders convicted of serious crimes. Michael and his legal team quickly seized this opportunity, which played a key role in their case. On April 22, 2022, Michael's two sisters, Melanie and Crystal, brought the entire family to the rehabilitation center to welcome their younger brother, who had been paroled after 23 years. At age 38, as he walked out of prison, Michael looked up at the sky and expressed gratitude to his mother, recognizing her unwavering support for keeping him hopeful during his difficult years in prison. After his release, Michael wanted to ride a bike, a favorite hobby from his life before prison. He moved in with his sister because he had nowhere else to go and hoped to forget the decades he spent surrounded by criminals. To help with this, he started removing the tattoos that reminded him of his time in prison. Eventually, he found work as a carpenter and reconnected with his old friend Josh, who sincerely apologized for his part in what happened. Michael understood and assured Josh that he held no grudge against him. Josh expressed regret for not sleeping on the sofa that night. He believed that if the attacker had come in through the front door and seen Josh on the sofa, things might have turned out differently. Despite the new law allowing for conditional early release, the prosecutor could still initiate a new trial at any time for those who had been released. However, Michael recognized that there were significant gaps in the police evidence against him. The case against him relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be challenged. These accusations had a serious impact on his reputation, but he remained hopeful that the court would reconsider the case, especially since the real killer was still at large. The lawyers proceeded with caution to avoid harming Michael or provoking Missouri's justice system. Eventually, the local sheriff acknowledged the need to reopen the investigation into Michael's mother's murder. This renewed focus required police to re-examine a large amount of evidence that had been neglected for over 20 years. One key piece of evidence, the Rita's car, was also available for analysis. The prosecutor's office collaborated with the defense team, marking a significant turning point for Michael. He had been imprisoned for a murder he did not commit since he was just 14 years old. After spending 23 years behind bars, which represented most of his life, he longed to return to a normal life and felt he was finally on that path. However, he still needed to clear his name completely. Additionally, Michael was determined to find his mother's real killer, convinced that his father was responsible for setting him up. This betrayal had devastated his life while his father continued to live freely. The investigation into the crime was still active, and despite the obstacles presented by the local justice system, many law enforcement officials, including the prosecutor, supported Michael. With their backing, he felt confident that the true criminal would eventually be brought to justice. The investigation is ongoing, and there are indications of progress. However, even if justice is served, it won't bring back the lost decades for Michael. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Laura Lopez. Laura Lopez was born on November 11, 2000, in Plata, Argentina. Her older sisters, Melissa and Damaris, who were 18 at the time of her birth, love her very much. Tragically, their mother passed away when Laura was just 3 years old, and her 3 sisters were taken care of by their father. Although he initially tried to support the family, he later fell into alcoholism a few years after. Despite the challenges she faced, Laura was known for her sweet and loving personality. Her sister affectionately called her Cello, a nickname that everyone who knew her called. Years later, when their father lost his job, the family needed to find additional work. At 18, Laura started selling fried pastries during the day while attending high school in the evening. In her free time, she focused on caring for her nieces and nephews. At the beginning of her studies, she hoped to secure a good job to improve her family's financial situation and bring them stability. Unfortunately, an unexpected incident occurred that hindered her plans. On September 12, 2019, Laura and Damaris spent the entire day enjoying tea together. Damaris had just completed renovations on her house, and Laura playfully remarked that Damaris had never made tea quite like that before. Regardless, it was a lovely day. Later, Laura went to school, where her classmates noticed something unusual about her behavior. She decided to sit at the back of the class instead of her usual seat and left shortly after 20 minutes, when the lesson ended. When Laura returned home around 11:30 p.m., a friend greeted her. They chatted, had a few drinks, and took selfies for social media. They said their goodbyes at 3 a.m. Laura expressed that she was feeling tired and to get some sleep. The next day, Melissa sent a message to Laura asking if she had seen a doctor for her ear problems. When Laura didn't respond, Melissa started to feel anxious. Worried about Laura's whereabouts, Melissa reached out to Damaris for information, which only heightened her concern. After hours of searching, Melissa and Damaris went to the police station for help. However, they were told they would have to wait 48 hours since Laura was last seen before they could file a missing person report. The officers thought Laura might have had a boyfriend, since it is common for teenagers to encounter situations like this. On Saturday the 14th, the police received a report, and they initiated a search, but unfortunately, it was too late. On Sunday the 15th, 2 fishermen working in the El River's breakwater area, just 15 kilometers from Laura's home, noticed something unusual. They remained calm until they discovered a young girl's body floating in the water, with limbs and a skull. They quickly contacted the authorities to report their find. When the officers arrived, they saw that the attack had been extremely violent, and it was clear that the attacker was skilled with knives. The detectives were actively looking for clues in the crime scene. They found a fabric bag, leggings, and underwear in the river, but they were completely destroyed. During their investigation, they also discovered 2 rings and, after searching the riverbed, found a knife stained with blood. The officers contacted Laura's family, and when Damaris arrived at the location, she quickly identified the clothing as Laura's belongings. Fishermen had found Laura's limbs and skull in shallow waters downstream from the initial discovery, which was then handed over to the forensic team for examination. Dr. Carlos Gordillo conducted the autopsy and determined that the death was caused by a severe blow to the head, which led to internal bleeding and increased pressure in the brain. A blow to the back of the head left her unconscious. Laura suffered between 2 and 4 hours of intense pain. Additionally, bruises were found on her arms, indicating that she had been beaten and had fought against her attacker. and the presence of intimate injuries on her body was a clear indication of sexual assault. Dr. Carlos Gordillo also mentioned that there were cuts on her neck, arms, and legs, suggesting that the attacker might have used kitchen knives. After 3 a.m. on Friday, they analyzed Laura's cell phone. Her last contact was with a 28-year-old mechanic named Alfredo Emilio Escobar. He and Laura had been high school classmates, and he enjoyed hunting and fishing, which meant he was skilled with a knife. His house was 2.5 kilometers, 20 blocks, from Laura's home, making it easy for him to visit. The cell tower signals were strong, and on September 13th, Alfredo contacted Laura 4 times. At that time, the cell towers showed they were both at home. Soon after, both phones were active near Laura's house. Laura's phone traveled to the city center and arrived at Alfredo's residence by 5 a.m. Laura's WhatsApp story featured an alien emoji, and her phone was still being tracked. Alfredo was found at his home at 5:52 a.m. After this time, Laura's phone stopped working, and there was no further communication from her. Records show that Alfredo didn't use his cell phone again until 11:05 p.m. the following day. Alfredo returned home at 12:05 p.m. on September 15th, caught by 13 cameras, including city and private surveillance. Investigations on local stores revealed recordings from the early morning of September 13th, showing their physical characteristics resemble Laura and Alfredo. Laura's then mobile phone was moving, and Alfredo was undoubtedly the only suspect in this case. During the investigation, one of the agents recognized Alfredo, recalling a meeting with him a year ago on Highway 22 while traveling to meet family in the towns of Nguyen and Plotier. At that time, a young man had crashed into a patrol car while driving over 80 kilometers per hour. He refused arrest, leading to a lawsuit. Alfredo was about to go to court for that incident, but now he faces more serious charges. At 8:30 a.m. on September 17th, a police patrol was stationed about 30 meters from Alfredo's residence. While on duty, they noticed a young man resembling he driving away from a Fiat Ducato minibus they had been watching. The police identified him by his face shape, facial features, and hairstyle. He entered a house and later left with 2 adults approximately 60 years old. The 3 of them got into a vehicle and headed towards Highway 22 without drawing attention. The police pursued the vehicle until it stopped in a remote area, around 30 meters from a bridge connecting Nguyen and Saletti. The elderly man and Alfredo got out of the vehicle at the same time, and the police asked for their identification. He was with his father and another man, while his mother stayed in the car. It was clear they were trying to leave the city. Alfredo agreed to the identification process but appeared nervous. Soon after, he was taken to the police station and his car was impounded. He underwent a medical examination, which revealed swollen areas on his right knuckles, indicating he had used them to punch. He also had cuts and bruises on the palm of his right hand. Laura's death happened the same day these were found. As a result, Alfredo was charged with raping and murdering Laura. Despite a request to remain silent, he was detained for 6 months over concerns he might escape or obstruct the investigation. On September 1st, a search warrant was executed at the Estrada Street residence where the Alfredo family lived. The property was large, with a construction site and 2 buildings at the back. In Alfredo's sleeping area, officers found fingerprints on the walls. Using luminol to test them revealed blood stains. A blood-stained cloth was also found during the search. The situation escalated when officers went to the building behind the residence and found blood spots on the crumpled vegetation. Blood was also detected on the gates, the right handle of a cart, and at one end of an infrared emitting device. This location was where the fatal blow that killed Laura occurred. The search team collected blood samples for comparison and found that both Laura's and Alfredo's blood were present. The fluid found on Laura's body was examined through DNA analysis. Alfredo's lawyer said the rape charges should not have been brought before the test results were available. However, the results were released shortly. The Ministry of Health Central Laboratory analyzed the samples collected during the investigation. The genetic profiles of both Laura and Alfredo were compared. At the time of his arrest, Alfredo was wearing sneakers, and a knife was found at the bottom of the river. Both were tested. DNA matching Laura's was found on both items. Her genital area was examined using 3 swabs, and Alfredo's DNA matched one of them. This evidence allowed investigators to confirm that he had sexually assaulted Laura. She was killed, dismembered, and her body was disposed of. Law enforcement officials confirmed this during a press conference on September 21st. The prosecutor Juan Austin Garcia believed Alfredo Emilio Escobar was guilty of the crime. He accused Alfredo of killing Laura to cover up the rape and said that if found guilty, Alfredo could be prosecuted and face life in prison. Despite this, more evidence was still needed. DNA analysis technology played an important role in discovering that Alfredo was the suspect. Although he did not plead guilty, the court ordered the seizure of his mobile phone and required him to provide the access code. Despite having Laura as one of his contacts, it was discovered that he had deleted her from the conversation the night she disappeared. He erased Laura's call history, but their social security numbers are still not deleted. Media interviews revealed Alfredo's actions on September 11th, 12th, and 13th. During the investigation, he visited social media platforms to look at photos shared by Laura. Although Alfredo claimed to be innocent, the evidence suggested he was responsible for the murder. Finally, conclusions have been drawn about the incident that took place on the night of the crime. On September 12, 2019, Laura left school around 8 p.m. After spending time with a friend, she mentioned feeling tired and intended to go to sleep. Despite this, Alfredo contacted her at 3:40 a.m. and they began a conversation. Although they were not friends, she agreed to meet him, and then she went to his house. The incident inside the house are unclear, but research shows that Laura avoided any personal contact with Alfredo. In a fit of anger, he sexually assaulted her. Because he was afraid she would denounce him to the authorities, he murdered her. Alfredo led Laura to the backyard, hitting her on the head twice. At that point, she was still alive, but he cruelly hid her body for several hours to avoid getting caught. He also turned off his phone. Laura's body remained in the shed for almost a day, and she died from her injuries. Alfredo used a sharp knife from his kitchen to dismember her body. He then packed the her parts into his Fiat Ducato minibus and drove 15 kilometers to the area near the breakwaters and left her body there. Afterward, he returned and turned on his phone. Feel relieved that everything has been settled. This case attracted the attention of the whole city. Alfredo's 23-year-old sister made the most headlines when she posted a message on her personal page mentioning both her brother and the victim, Laura. The post received mixed reactions. Some people sympathized with her, while others accused her of being complicit. The younger sister Alfredo's asked Cello and her team to remain vigilant, as her family is involved. Melissa later contacted Alfredo's sister to thank her for the message and asked for clarification. The criminal case was immediately initiated by the prosecution. The initial court hearings were held at the Provincial Legislative Assembly. According to the prosecutor of Nucan, Alfredo was entirely responsible for his actions, and Laura's death was attributed to gender-based violence, in addition to other charges such as rape. In the same hearing, the experts who were involved in analyzing the clothing found in the case, the river, along with the remains and evidence discovered at Alfredo's house, provided their testimony. Florencia, Laura's closest friend, was an unexpected witness. She explained that Alfredo had been messaging Laura for months, inviting her to meet for drinks and socializing. However, they had never met before. Florencia had known Alfredo for 5 years and was aware of his bad reputation. His house frequently hosted parties filled with alcohol and drugs, and intimate acts shared publicly by couples. Florencia had repeatedly advised Laura not to get involved with him, but she consistently ignored. The defense asked why Florencia had not suggested Laura blocking Alfredo's number. Florencia responded that Laura had made that decision and she did not want to interfere in Laura's life. While Florencia was on the stand, a video from security cameras from the day Laura disappeared was shown. In the footage from around 4 a.m., 2 people can be seen on opposite sides of the screen, heading towards the city center. Florencia admits that it was Laura, stating that her sneakers, jacket, and manner of walking were unmistakable. She also recognized Alfredo. The testimony of Alfredo's friend revealed his impulsiveness when the judge accused him of infidelity. His behavior was characterized by substance abuse and womanizing tendencies. Alfredo's ex-partner, also present in court, stated that their relationship ended badly years ago. She reported him to the authorities because she believed he had stolen from her house and taken money. When she met him to ask for the money back, he chased after the friend who accompanied her. After reviewing the testimonies, Alfredo tried to defend himself. He claimed that his friend, who sold him illegal drugs, was the real culprit. He said that he had been unconscious during the incident that night. He told the local media that he did not commit murder. He explained that he was intoxicated that night, and his friend was also under the influence of drugs at his residence with Laura. When he heard a scream from one of the rooms, Alfredo went to check it out. Seeing blood, he cleaned it up and helped his friend hide the body. In the end, the truth is what truly matters. Despite the lack of evidence, the statement was not confirmed. Alfredo was the only suspect. In his speech, the prosecutor stated that Alfredo took advantage of betraying Laura's trust due to his familiarity with her. He was responsible for the cruelty of his actions and the gruesome method of disposing of the remains. Alfredo Emilio Alfredo was convicted of the rape and murder of 18-year-old Laura Lopez after a jury deliberated for just 40 minutes. This charge is made more serious because it involved an attempt to conceal the attack. The issue of gender violence played a role in the case, leading to him receiving a life sentence without the possibility of release. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne Baldelli, born Fold, was born on June 30, 1969, in a small town in sunny Southern California. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold and grew up with her brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she developed a particularly close relationship from an early age. When Yvonne was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried Leland F.A., and the grown children developed a wonderful relationship with their stepmother, who was a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Yvonne received a solid education and explored many career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She had been married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce. Additionally, a surgery she underwent as a young woman, followed by complications, left Yvonne unable to have children. After her divorce from her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in 2007, Yvonne lived alone in her small apartment with her dog, whom she affectionately called Baby. She kept in regular contact with her father and sister, calling them almost every day and trying to see her family at least once a month. In 2009, as Yvonne was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimmager. At the time, he was legally married and had a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open about his extramarital affair and shared with Yvonne that he was unhappy in his marriage, claiming that he had not filed for divorce only because he did not want to hurt his child. Yvonne fell in love with this handsome, tanned, healthy man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself and knowing how difficult it is to leave such a relationship, she did not push her partner, believing that the presence of a child was the main obstacle. However, Brian was not as straightforward and sincere as he seemed. From a young age, his attractive appearance made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was used to juggling several relationships at once and skillfully deceived the women who fell in love with him, promising each of them marriage, a family, and eternal love. It was soon discovered that the married Brian had not only met Yvonne but had also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a gorgeous blonde with many connections. She was a White House analyst. When Yvonne learned about another rival, she decided to tackle the situation directly and fight for the man she loved. Summoning her courage, she contacted Brian's wife to reveal that he was cheating on her with 2 women. This revelation caused a heated debate, forcing Brian to make a difficult decision. In the end, he chose Yvonne, though it's possible she influenced his choice. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with Yvonne. At that time, he was still in the Marines but had been thinking about leaving his military career. The couple appeared genuinely happy, but Yvonne's family remained skeptical of Brian, questioning the sincerity of his feelings. In the summer of 2011, Brian expressed his desire to make significant changes in his life. He wanted to leave the military, move away from the busy city, and settle on a tropical island. Yvonne felt the same way. She supported him completely and was ready to go wherever he chose. She believed he was the most important person in her life and loved him deeply. By September of that year, they had made their decision. The couple would move to Panama and live on the small island of Carino, which they considered a true paradise. Yvonne told her family about her plans just before leaving, so they didn't have a chance to convince her to change her mind. She sold her apartment, quit her job, and began packing for the trip. Yvonne packed only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, aiming to start a small boutique where she could create and sell custom outfits for tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Yvonne, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a few days in the capital before taking a ferry to Carino Island, where they rented a house right by the ocean. The climate was hot and humid, with consistent temperatures year-round, which attracted many tourists, especially those interested in diving and surfing. The island was only 1 square kilometer in size, allowing visitors to walk around it in about an hour. Most of the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior consisted of dense jungle and swampy areas filled with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it dangerous to explore. Brian, a talented guitar player since he was young, brought his guitar hoping to start a musical career by performing in local entertainment venues on the island. Within a week of moving, he had contacted with several local bar owners, and one of them offered him a job. He performed in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his audience often bought him drinks, which led him to drink heavily almost every day. Yvonne's business was growing very slowly, facing poor sales and making little profit. Nevertheless, she remained determined. She took a job at one of the bars and adopted a second dog she found on the island. Yvonne communicated with her sister, Michelle, almost every day, sharing updates, but her messages became shorter and more gloomy, causing concern for her family. The couple initially enjoyed their first few months on the island, feeling like they were in paradise. Yvonne dreamed that Brian would propose and they would have a romantic wedding by the ocean. However, as time went on, Brian didn't seem eager to get married, and their relationship began to decline. By early December, Michelle noticed that Yvonne had stopped messaging her, which made her worry. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle to ask when he could come by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her family garage before going to Panama. This call surprised Michelle because it meant that Brian was back in the US and wanted to pick up his car. She wondered where Yvonne was and why she hadn't returned or even contacted her. Brian said he had detailed everything in an email sent a few days ago. He also said that his ex-girlfriend had supposedly messaged Yvonne about the situation. Michelle looked at her messages but found nothing, so she checked her email. She discovered 2 unread messages, one from her younger sister and another from him. In his messages, Brian stated that Yvonne had left him, running away to Costa Rica with a new lover. Another message, purportedly from Yvonne, claimed that she had left Brian after discovering his affair and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. The message ended with her stating that she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine, with whom he had been involved for a long time and who was pregnant with his child when he and Yvonne flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed reasonable, especially since Yvonne was unable to have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else would have been extremely distressing for her. However, Yvonne was not known for acting impulsively, and she would certainly have called her younger sister to discuss such a major change in her life. Furthermore, the tone of the message purportedly from Yvonne was somewhat strange and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle attempted to determine her younger sister's current whereabouts, she was unable to obtain any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and incoming messages were brief and discreet, stating things like, "I'm fine, I need time," and "I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian file a missing persons report. Brian appeared concerned but insisted that it was unnecessary, asserting that Yvonne was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to return home. Although Brian was reluctant to even discuss the matter and hurriedly left after getting the car, a message from Yvonne's phone soon arrived, stating that she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message relieved Michelle, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping that Yvonne would return as stated in the message. By mid-January, not only had Yvonne not returned home, but she had also not called once during that time, and her messages had stopped altogether. Furthermore, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had married Christine just before New Year's, which seemed very strange since he had broken up with his ex-girlfriend just weeks before the celebration. Worried, Michelle eventually went to the police department and reported her younger sister missing, suspecting that Yvonne had not gone to Costa Rica. An official investigation sent to Panama, the results showed that Yvonne had not left the country. Michelle then asked her cousin, a programmer, to help track down the IP address from which Yvonne had sent the messages, determining their true origin. It turned out that the emails purportedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was staying. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. As the situation became increasingly alarming, Michelle rushed to inform the police of her discovery. Michelle contacted the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her younger sister in Panama and then continued to send text messages and emails from her phone, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue to gather evidence of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Yvonne. He promised Christine that he would return soon, that they would marry, and that they would raise their daughter together. Furthermore, Christine did not know that Brian had come to the island with Yvonne, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's investigation began 2 months after Yvonne's disappearance when her sister and niece flew to Panama themselves. There, they sought the help of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator specializing in finding missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and Brian's version of events. After listening to them, Don immediately expressed concern that the possibility of Yvonne being alive was very low. With extensive experience in such investigations and leveraging her connections, Don decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was held with the participation of Yvonne's family members. Later, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other close relatives and friends traveled to Panama to join the search and assist in the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Carino, searched thoroughly, but found no trace of Yvonne. Their search efforts were hampered by dense bushes and swamps filled with wild animals. In addition, the family asked the islanders how well they knew Brian and Yvonne and what they could tell them. It turned out that the couple had been drinking heavily recently and often argued loudly, disregarding those around them. They were seen at the bar almost every day, drinking and arguing violently. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body. She hardly ever took off her sunglasses, apparently to hide the bruises under her eyes. The couple's landlord confirmed that neighbors frequently complained about noise, screaming, and swearing coming from their residence. At the same time, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to search for any potential evidence or remains of her. Unfortunately, these searches also yielded no results. Brian was initially the prime suspect in the case, but there was no concrete evidence to charge him. He denied any involvement, repeatedly telling the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It was not until September 21, 2012, that Brian was questioned and his home searched. At the time, his wife, Christine, was at work while Brian, unemployed, stayed home with the children and immersed in his beloved game of golf. Initially, he appeared confident, recalling that Yvonne had left him after discovering his child with another woman. However, he became visibly concerned, and the police mentioned that the last messages sent under Yvonne's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his desk. The confiscated laptop turned out to be Yvonne's, with messages sent from it after she had supposedly fled. A photo of Yvonne with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November in which Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and the shared custody of their daughter, which is probably how Yvonne learned about them. Furthermore, the laptop search history from November 26, 2011, contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were important but circumstantial, as no body or mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had sent messages impersonating Yvonne did not conclusively prove his guilt. Don soon discovered that before leaving Panama, Brian had sold a machete he owned. In an online chat with a potential buyer, he joked that he had only used the weapon once, to finish off a stripper. The prank was so creepy that authorities tracked down the machete's new owner and confiscated the blade for testing, which initially yielded no reliable results. The long-awaited arrest came when police overlooked another crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card. Brian had used the card after she disappeared to add credibility to his story. Before returning to the United States, he decided to take a trip to Costa Rica and used her card multiple times, creating the illusion that she had actually fled to that country. He paid for his ticket in cash and withdrew money from various locations in San Jose, emptying the card before discarding it. Brian had no idea, however, that he had been caught on surveillance cameras at ATMs. In July 2013, a year and a half after Yvonne disappeared, her relatives, along with evidence collected by the police, FBI, and Don Winter, succeeded in getting Brian arrested. He was initially charged with making false statements and obstructing the investigation due to a lack of stronger evidence at that time. At that point, Brian had recently become a father for the second time, as Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to have an honest conversation with Brian, hoping he would confess to the crime and reveal where the body was, but he repeatedly denied any involvement. His lawyer argued that there was no body and no direct evidence linking Brian to Yvonne's disappearance. 2 months after Brian's arrest, investigators made a shocking discovery in the swamp that significantly advanced the case. On Canaro Island, a worker exploring a shortcut accidentally stumbled upon a partially submerged army backpack in the murky underbrush. Out of curiosity, he opened the bag and was horrified to find a human skull inside. He promptly reported the discovery to the police, who arrived to collect the backpack for further examination. Inside, they found dismembered human remains along with the bodies of 2 small dogs. The remains had been cut into pieces, placed in the bag, and hidden in a spot where they were unlikely to be discovered. DNA tests confirmed that the human remains were those of Yvonne, though some body parts were missing. Pathologists revealed that she had suffered severe trauma prior to her death, including a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The presence of the dogs suggested a calculated effort to support the narrative, as it seemed unlikely that Yvonne would abandon her beloved pets, implying that they were also killed and buried alongside her. The chop marks on the victim's bones matched the blade of a machete, confirming that the body had been dismembered with this one. Each machete blade has a unique pattern, similar to a fingerprint. As a result of this evidence, Brian was officially charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. In early 2014, Michelle was diagnosed with advanced aggressive cancer. She had been so focused on investigating her younger sister's case that she neglected her own health and put off doctor visits. After 6 months of intensive treatment that didn't work, she chose to spend her remaining time fighting for justice for her sister. In September 2014, doctors informed Michelle that she had only a few weeks to live. Despite her illness, she vowed to continue advocating for her sister until her last moments. She decided to testify in front of Brian, sharing everything she knew and providing all correspondence with Yvonne to the court. She carefully recounted Brian's actions following her sister's disappearance, but then fainted from exhaustion. Michelle died 3 days later. The prosecution contended that on the night of November 26, after another argument with Yvonne over Brian's messages to Christine, Brian, fueled by anger and alcohol, attacked Yvonne and fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub with a machete, using the same weapon to kill Yvonne's dogs, and placed their remains in his military backpack. The limbs that couldn't fit in the bag were discarded in the ocean, thrown off a rocky cliff early in the morning, along with a blood-stained mattress. Brian then carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the following weeks, he stayed in the same coastal house, carefully removing any traces of the crime. He told the locals a convincing story about his girlfriend leaving him for another man, which led them to sympathize with him. He even found a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until he left for the U.S. During the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of dishonesty and being cruel. With strong evidence against him, Brian admitted his guilt but argued it was in self-defense, claiming that Yvonne had attacked him first with a knife, which he then used to defend himself. He stated that everything that happened afterward was due to shock, insisting he didn't remember dismembering her body or handling the dogs. However, his internet searches and efforts to destroy evidence showed that he was fully aware of his actions and tried to create a false narrative to explain Yvonne's disappearance. In the spring of 2016, Brian was convicted of manslaughter and received a 26-year prison sentence, with the chance for parole in 2035. His prior service in the Marines was taken into account during sentencing, which helped him avoid a life sentence. Additionally, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, expressed her belief in his innocence and her unwavering support for him. The tragic case of Yvonne Baldelli highlights not only the devastating impact of domestic violence and deceit but also the tireless pursuit of justice by her family. Despite the initial fog of lies and misdirection, the truth ultimately emerged, revealing a chilling narrative of betrayal and loss. Yvonne's story serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of vigilance and support for those in perilous situations, urging us to seek justice for victims and ensure that their voices are never silenced. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Isla Reynolds. Isla Reynolds was born on April 4, 2010 in Waterville, Maine, USA. With blonde hair, blue eyes, and a charming smile, she was an adorable child who loved music and dancing. Her parents, Trista Reynolds and Justin DiPietro, had a brief romantic relationship in the summer of 2009, which resulted in Trista becoming pregnant. However, the couple broke up and Justin was initially a bit apprehensive about becoming a father, even doubting whether he was really the biological father of the child. When Trista gave birth to Isla, the child bore a strong resemblance to Justin, but he initially refused to acknowledge Isla as his daughter. However, after a paternity test in July 2010, Justin finally accepted his role as her father. As a result, Child Protective Services ordered Justin to pay child support in December 2010. Although Trista and Justin did not have a formal custody agreement in court, they did have an agreement in which Trista, who resided in Portland, would have primary physical custody. It was not until mid-2011, after Isla's first birthday, that Justin began spending time with his daughter. Since he lived an hour and a half away and visits were scheduled to be during the day and very brief, they agreed that Justin could occasionally take Isla with him but never overnight. Trista gave birth to her first child, Isla. Soon after, she became pregnant with her new boyfriend Raymond's child. In 2011, Trista had her second child, a son named Raymond Jr., and Isla became a big sister. Trista cared for both children until October 13, 2011, when Child Protective Services intervened due to concerns. The details of the complaint that led to the meeting are unclear, but it is known that Trista had a substance abuse problem. That day, officials gave her an ultimatum: overcome her addiction or lose custody of her children. In order to avoid losing custody, Trista entered a 10-day rehabilitation program and left the children in the care of her mother and sister. Isla and Raymond Jr. were her world, and she was determined not to lose them. By October 2011, Justin had seen Isla about 5 to 10 times. However, just 4 days after Trista was taken into custody, on October 17, Justin and his family decided to take custody of Isla. Justin's mother, Phoebe DiPietro, contacted Child Protective Services and was approved to take Isla. The agency promptly notified Trista's relatives of the decision. However, Isla's aunt, Jessica, strongly disagreed with Child Protective Services' decision, accusing Justin of abusing Isla in the past and expressing concerns for the child's well-being. The officials argued that a father had more custody rights than an aunt. After being granted permission, Justin and his family went to pick up Isla, but they did not know the exact address. To resolve the issue, Child Protective officials provided the location through Officer Charles Weaver. Officer Charles accompanied Justin and his mother to Jessica's home, where Isla was staying with her aunt. While the grandmother waited in the car, Justin and Officer Charles approached the door. A dramatic scene ensued as Jessica pleaded with the police not to take Isla away, warning that she would not give up the child willingly. Despite the stress, police observed that Isla appeared to be very happy, constantly laughing, playing, and even trying to strike up a conversation. Trista's sister, Jessica, asked the police to observe how Isla's behavior changed when Justin arrived. When Justin approached, Isla immediately began crying and tried to get away from him. Despite her distress, the police handed Isla over to her father. Isla struggled and screamed, even trying to bite the police officer when she was placed in Justin's arms. Jessica explained to Officer Charles that Isla was extremely afraid of her father and that it was not in her best interest to take the child away from her family. Charles explained that if it were up to him, he would not let Isla go with Justin, but that it was not his decision and that he was there to enforce the directive from Child Services. In order to transfer custody, one option is to reach an agreement with the child's mother or seek the judge's approval through a court proceeding. However, in a recent custody exchange, neither of these steps were taken. Instead, the decision was made by the Child Protective Services supervisor. Unfortunately, the supervisor awarded custody to the child's father, Justin. Before the court grants sole custody to a parent, it typically conducts a thorough evaluation, including a background check and home visit. However, this did not occur in Isla's case. The primary consideration in custody decisions is the best interests of the child, but there are no records to support the decision made in Isla's case. Analysts say the only reason to remove a child from her maternal relatives is if the child is in imminent danger. If officials believed Isla was in danger, it is unclear why her younger brother, Raymond Jr., was not removed from the home. The father took her to his family home in Waterville. His 47-year-old mother, Phoebe, his 24-year-old sister, Alicia, and her young daughter, Gabriella, also lived there. Justin, the 25-year-old father, lived in a basement, a large, partially finished room, while the rest of the family lived upstairs. Trista called Justin every day during his rehabilitation to talk to Isla and make sure everything was okay. She did not notice anything unusual in these calls. On October 20, 2011, when Trista was on her 8th day of treatment, a meeting was held to discuss Isla's situation. Attendees included members of Child Protective Services, 2 doctors, Trista, her sister Jessica, an attorney, and Justin, who participated by phone. As a result of the discussion, an agreement was reached that Isla would be returned to Trista on October 22, 2011, after completing her addiction recovery program. It was also decided that Justin would take Isla to a treatment center on October 21 to visit her mother. Although things initially seemed to be going well for Trista, the situation soon took a turn for the worse, with no agreement being made and implemented. Trista desperately sought the help of Child Protective Services to enforce their original agreement, but her repeated calls were unsuccessful. So she proposed a temporary solution to Justin. He would continue to care for their daughter, and she would have regular visitation rights to Isla. However, on November 12, 2011, Justin took their daughter to the emergency room after she was injured. After conducting relevant tests, doctors determined that she had a broken arm. Justin told the doctor that the accident happened the night before, November 11th. It was raining, he said, and he slipped and fell on her while on the porch with Isla in his arms. He added that although the girl was crying, she did not appear to be injured, and it was not until the next morning that it became clear that she needed urgent medical attention. By the following Monday, the orthopedist said that surgery was not necessary and that the injury would heal on its own. A week later, on November 26th, at a third medical appointment to assess the child's progress, the specialist said everything was going according to plan. Trista was present at that medical appointment to closely monitor her daughter's recovery, never thinking that it would be the last time she would hold her. The mother's decision to seek custody of Isla marked a turning point. On December 15, 2011, she filed a petition with the court to begin the custody process due to ongoing disputes over visitation and communication with her daughter. Just 2 days later, on December 17, 2011, Justin contacted the police, reporting Isla missing from his mother's home, where he was staying with his girlfriend Courtney Roberts and his sister Alicia. According to Justin, Isla had been put to bed the night before, but when they woke up, the 20-month-old was no longer there. That morning, Trista had gone to visit her husband Raymond at a correctional facility in a coastal Maine town near the Canadian border. Raymond was serving time for arson. Trista was in the passenger seat, asleep, while her father-in-law, Robert Fourier, drove. Robert receives a call from Trista's father with alarming news: Trista's child, Isla, is missing. Robert is momentarily stunned by the news, then finds a safe place to stop the car and wake Trista. Still half asleep, Trista hears her father's voice on the phone and tries to grasp the terrible news of her child's disappearance. Panicked, she immediately instructs Robert to change direction and go meet the police who are looking for Isla. Trista's hour-and-a-half journey feels like a century as she anxiously tries to contact Justin, growing increasingly frightened when he does not answer her calls. Upon arriving at the police station, Trista and her father-in-law, Robert, give their statements. 30 minutes later, Trista's father joins them. Justin called 911 at 8:49 a.m. that morning to report her missing, saying that Isla was last seen the night before at 10 p.m. by Justin's sister, Alicia, who had gone to check on Isla before going to bed. However, by Saturday morning, Isla had disappeared from her crib, with Justin not specifying the exact time she had gone missing in the call. Justin's theory was that Isla had been abducted by a stranger. As news of her disappearance quickly spread, the police quickly launched an investigation. In a statement to the media, the police chief assured that they were working diligently to find Isla at all costs. To aid in the search, the police thoroughly searched the house for any potential clues that could lead them to Isla. On the second day of the search, Sunday, December 18th, trained search dogs were brought in to assist. The area around the house where Isla was last seen was thoroughly searched and a detailed search was conducted at Trista's home. Due to the search, Trista had to temporarily stay in a motel with her mother and youngest son. By December 19th, the third day after the disappearance, the FBI was brought in to assist in the search. By this time, approximately 75 people from various agencies were involved in the investigation. State police had seized 2 vehicles from Justin's home, a 1996 Ford Explorer owned by Justin and a silver 4-door sedan owned by Justin's girlfriend, Courtney, who had been present the night of the disappearance. The news quickly attracted local media attention, and in the days that followed, Trista appeared in several local media outlets, criticizing Justin and implying that he was responsible for the disappearance. As the news spread nationwide, Trista continued to express her concerns, saying that Justin, as the last person to see her daughter alive, was the only one who could answer her questions. Finally, Justin released a statement to the media on Wednesday, asserting that he knew nothing about Isla's disappearance and assuring the public that he and his family would cooperate fully with the investigation to ensure Isla's safe return. However, in his statement, Justin admitted that Isla was in his sole custody at the time of her disappearance. But he lied, saying this was achieved through an agreement with the mother. Furthermore, he added that Trista was incapable of caring for the child. As time went on, the search effort expanded. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, CARD, canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on every door. They contacted every household, returned to the area multiple times, and interviewed neighbors to gather vital information. With a team of 75 dedicated officers, the police demonstrated their unwavering commitment to solving the case. Within 10 days of Justin's initial report, police had spent approximately 5,000 hours searching and were actively pursuing 330 leads. A massive search effort for Isla involved approximately 50 civilian volunteers from a search and rescue association. In addition, a $30,000 reward was offered to anyone who could provide valuable information that could assist in finding Isla. Isla's devoted mother, Trista, played a key role in bringing the case to the forefront. She worked with the support group to organize numerous events, such as vigils and parades, to honor Isla's memory. Her persistence ensured that the case remained in the public eye, with news cameras continuing to cover the story. Trista, along with other spokespeople, provided reporters with updates to keep the story on the front page. Initially, police treating the case as a missing persons investigation rather than a homicide. However, began to change when police sealed off Justin's home and the surrounding area. Police also seized his car and made a major announcement, further altering the public's perception of the case at the direction of the head of the Criminal Prosecution Agency, who made a public announcement. The police officially ruled out the possibility that Isla had run away on her own. On the 13th day of the investigation, the sheriff transferred the case to the state police's Major Crimes Unit. In this announcement, a difficult reality was revealed. The case had been moved from a missing persons investigation to a criminal investigation. In the early days, Justin kept a low profile and avoided the media, but over time, he began to appear more frequently. In one of his interviews on the Today Show, he addressed the change in the law enforcement message, asserting that Isla had been kidnapped and begging the person who kidnapped her to bring her home. He stated that he went on the show to approach whoever kidnapped his daughter and tell them that their actions were wrong. He stressed that they had no right to make such a decision because they were not her father and stressed that Isla needed to stay home with her family. When asked about his previous silence, Justin admitted that he had refrained from speaking out because he initially thought Isla would return. He said that the police had advised him to stay away from the media, a part confirmed by a Department of Public Safety spokesperson. The spokesperson clarified that this advice was only given initially, and that the police had later encouraged Isla's parents to make more public appearances. Justin addressed the allegations against him directly. He invited the TV host to spend a day with him to see firsthand what he was going through. He expressed his appreciation for the police's efforts. Justin stressed that the truth remains the same, no matter how many times someone may be accused or called a liar. He believes that the truth is patient and will eventually come out. In late January, police announced that Isla's blood had been found in several locations in Justin's home. They also indicated that, although there was not enough evidence to make an arrest, Justin, Courtney, and Alicia, the three adults who lived in the home where Isla was last seen, were considered suspects. Stephen McCausland, a spokesman for the Department of Public Safety, stated that the family's account of the events was not supported by any forensic evidence, dismissing the possibility that someone had broken into Isla's bedroom undetected and taken her while the three adults were in the home. 6 months after Isla was reported missing. On May 30, 2012, police stated that there was no possibility that she was still alive. Trista's family allowed reporters into their home for a press conference announcing the news. Upon hearing the news, Trista immediately burst into tears, which quickly turned to anger as she accused Justin of killing her daughter. For Trista's family, learning the details of the forensic tests conducted at Justin's home was extremely difficult. They knew that Isla's blood had been found and that the amount of blood represented 25% of her total blood volume. However, they never saw the evidence until January 2013, when everything that had been discovered was revealed to them. Justin's 1996 Ford Explorer had a child seat in the back, where Isla's blood was found on the left shoulder strap. Dried vomit was also found in the back seat. In the girl's bedroom, police discovered blood on her princess pink sneakers, which were on the floor next to her crib, as well as on the face and arms of her doll. They believe she may have tried to clean the blood from her mouth with her toy. A blood stain was also found on the living room sofa. Most of the blood was found in the basement, where a pool of Isla's blood was found in the middle of the mattress Justin shared with Courtney. In addition, vomit and a pink strand that looked like the hair of a toy were found on the bed. Justin's sneakers, which had Isla's blood on the tongue and inside, were found next to the bed. There were also blood stains on the cement floor around the bed and on the walls, which corresponded to Isla's height. An expert determined that some of the blood drops were the size of a dime, indicating blunt force trauma. Furthermore, experts pointed out that some of the blood spatter in the house could have been caused by Isla's coughing, suggesting that she had suffered both internal and external injuries. Police said that they had used bed sheets to clean up Isla's blood. This was a horrifying revelation for Trista and her family, and they still had many more disturbing details to learn. Luminol tests conducted in the house revealed traces of blood that were not visible to the naked eye. The photo slides from the house left Trista deeply distressed. She panicked and left the police station, now more convinced than ever that her daughter, Isla, had been murdered. The police wanted to show her more photos, but she refused, saying she had seen enough. Months earlier, when the police presented the same photographic evidence, he showed no reaction. The police also tried to show Justin's family the photos. They refused. They were not interested. Justin's girlfriend, Courtney, who was with him the night Isla disappeared, reacted in a similar way. Overwhelmed and helpless, Trista told the press that Justin, Alicia, and Courtney were still walking down the street as if nothing had happened. 8 months after receiving a critical report in September 2013, Trista decided to write a letter to the press about the evidence and photos she had seen. She was frustrated by the slow progress and wanted to rekindle public interest in the case. In the spring of 2016, a group of journalists went to Justin's mother's house. His younger sister, Alicia, answered the door and was asked about the journalist who asked about the blood evidence. She mentioned that Isla was lactose intolerant and had been throwing up. However, a quick online search revealed that common symptoms of lactose intolerance include gas, bloating, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. While nausea and vomiting can occur, they are not the most typical symptoms, let alone vomiting blood. In 2017, at Trista's request, a judge officially declared Isla dead, determining that her death occurred on or about December 17, 2011, when her father, Justin, reported her missing. With this declaration, Trista and her attorney filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Justin, claiming he caused Isla's death through intentional unlawful acts and caused her pain and suffering before her death, including fear, terror, and physical injury. At the time of the lawsuit, Isla was still missing, and Justin, along with his attorney, denied any wrongdoing, describing the lawsuit as baseless. In response, Trista held a press conference where she addressed Justin directly, questioning whether he had a conscience. She said, "I could see it in your eyes, and you knew it was a problem. You looked at me, and I knew you cared." In early 2023, a judge granted Trista's request to add his mother, Phoebe, and his sister, Alicia, to the wrongful death lawsuit. The 3 defendants are now facing civil charges of wrongful death, intentional infliction of pain and suffering, and unlawful interference with the body of a deceased person. Additionally, Justin faces charges of failing to fulfill his parental duty of care to a minor child. Trista and her attorney understand that they will not receive any financial compensation from Justin. That is not the purpose of the lawsuit. Their purpose is to learn the truth behind Isla's disappearance. There are many strange things about Isla's disappearance. The police informed Trista of a shocking detail. On the morning Isla went missing, Justin drove to Portland and back before calling 911. He claimed that he thought Trista had kidnapped Isla and was looking for Trista, but he never contacted her or any of her family members. Instead, during that long drive, he called a friend who had sold him a $25,000 life insurance policy on Isla just weeks earlier. Adding to the strangeness, Justin stayed at this friend's house while the police were investigating the case. This was surprising, especially since he had been absent from his daughter's life for 9 months of Trista's pregnancy and for most of Isla's life. Trista also shared that she had received strange text messages from Justin in the week after Isla went missing. He expressed fears that someone might try to kidnap Isla. The last time he mentioned someone trying to kidnap her was on December 11th, just 6 days before Isla was reported missing. After her disappearance, his messages became threatening and cryptic, leaving Trista wondering what he really meant. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Politte family. The Politte family was viewed as a model family, meeting everyone's expectations with their stable financial situation and outstanding children. They earned admiration from the community. The father, William Politte, grew up in Connecticut and excelled in many sports during high school, especially basketball, where he demonstrated natural leadership. Beyond his athletic talents, he was also the top student in his class, earning a law degree from Dartmouth University. However, William discovered that his true passion was not in law. He wanted to help others, care for the sick, and making the world a better place. After graduating, he chose to pursue a career in medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. During his third year of residency at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, William met Jennifer Hawk, a nurse in the oncology department and medical center co-director of a pre-graduation internship program. They quickly fell in love, and those around them believed they were a perfect match. They married in 1985, and 4 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, Haley. Then, they to buy a house in Cheshire, Connecticut. On November 17, 1995, their second daughter, Michaela, was born. After recovering from childbirth, Jennifer resumed her role as a nurse and co-director of the internship. Unfortunately, she later developed multiple sclerosis, an incurable condition that she fought for the rest of her life. During her struggle with the disease, her family was always by her side and supported her. At 10 years old, their old daughter, Haley, started raising money for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, successfully gathering big funds over the years. Michaela was also a strong student and intended to take over the fundraising when her old sister went to college. She spent the summer learning to cook and loved making meals for her family. Sadly, this everyday activity would ultimately lead the family to a tragic meeting with their attacker. In July 2007, Michaela was making dinner for her family, but then she realized she needed more ingredients. She and her mother went to the nearest market to shop. At the same time, Joshua, had been released from prison, was also at the market. Joshua had a troubled childhood, and a week after birth, he was given up for adoption. The Komisarjevsky family, known for their artistic achievements in Europe, adopted him. They were a strict and religious family. Despite having a high IQ, Joshua struggled in school, which led his adoptive parents to let him homeschool. During his trial, he revealed that he had been sexually abused by a cousin when he was a child, but his family opted to keep this a secret. This experience shaped his rebellious and rampant behavior. At the age of 14, Joshua Komisarjevsky was accused of abusing his sister, and around this time, he committed his first burglary. In 2002, he was arrested on 18 charges of burglary, leading to a 9-year prison sentence. He was released on parole in 2007 when he was 27 years old. Officials deemed him a danger to society, describing him as a calculating criminal with perverted tendencies. Despite these warnings, the jury found him fit for release. After his release, Joshua lived in a halfway house for ex-convicts, where he met his accomplice, Stephen Hayes. Hayes had spent much of his life in prison, beginning his incarceration at the age of 16 in 1980. Throughout the years, he was often arrested for violent robbery and burglary. He was sentenced in 2004 and granted parole in 2006, which brought him to the same halfway house, where he met Joshua. Returning to the night of July 22, 2007, when Michaela was cooking dinner for her family when she realized she needed more ingredients. She asked her mother to take her to the nearest market. Unbeknownst to them, Joshua was watching taking note of everything, the type of car they drove, their appearances, and Michaela's blonde hair. After shopping, Michaela and Jennifer returned home, still unaware that someone was following them. Soon after, Stephen sent a text to Joshua expressing his eagerness to get started and mentioning that he needed a margarita. Stephen followed up by asking if they were still on, to which Joshua affirmed that they were. Meanwhile, Joshua secretly followed Michaela and Jennifer in his car, finding out where they lived before leaving the area. The family enjoyed what appeared to be a calm and normal dinner, unaware that it would be their last together. In the early morning, while everyone else was asleep, William was dozing in the living room. Their peace was suddenly disrupted by strange noises in the house. William suddenly felt groggy, in pain, and unable to think clearly. Two intruders, Joshua and Stephen, had come in through an unlocked door with the intention of robbing the family. They found a baseball bat and began to beat William. He heard one of the attackers say, "If he moves, shoot him." Afterward, William was bound with zip ties. Joshua and Stephen used ties to restrain William and bind him to a pole in the basement. They then went upstairs to find Haley's room, where she was sleeping. Haley and Michaela were tied by their hands and feet to their bedposts, with pillowcases over their heads. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Jennifer was also asleep. The intruders quietly entered her room and woke her up. They tied her hands and feet, showing their control over the situation. Joshua and Stephen carefully searched the house, even taking time to smoke cigarettes in the living room. After gathering jewelry, cash, and other valuables, they prepared to leave. However, a Politte family nightmare was just beginning. After selling the stolen items at a pawn shop and realizing they hadn't made as much money as they hoped, Joshua and Stephen, driven by greed, decided to return to the house. They discovered a check register containing $40,000 and plotted to steal $155,000. Before going back, they also filled a couple of gasoline cans, as captured by surveillance cameras. Once back at the house, they threatened Jennifer, saying they would kill her entire family if she didn't help them. Fearing for family's safety, Jennifer reluctantly agreed to go with Stephen to the bank the next morning. Meanwhile, Joshua exploited Jennifer's absence, he entering Michaela's room, untying her, and attempting to undress her. He took photos with his cell phone and assaulted her, recording the act. Afterward, he took her to the bathroom to clean her, ensuring no DNA evidence was left behind. He then ordered her to put her pajamas back on and tied her up again. Evidence of Joshua's assault on Michaela was found during her autopsy, where state medical examiner Dr. Wayne Carver discovered his DNA in her body. At the bank, everything seemed normal, but Stephen did not notice Jennifer's actions while they waited in line. Before reaching the teller, she wrote a note on a flyer asking for help. The note stated that her name was Jennifer Politte and that she needed to withdraw $115,000 from her savings account. She mentioned that her family was in danger and requested that the police be called, or they would be killed. Despite Jennifer not having any identification, the teller decided to give her the money. With the cash in hand, Jennifer left the bank to return to the car with Stephen. Meanwhile, the bank employee quickly called the police to report the situation. Meanwhile, at the house, Joshua disclosed to Stephen what he had done to Michaela, implying he could easily do the same to Jennifer. Then, Stephen restrained Jennifer by pushing her to the ground and began to undress her. William, upstairs, could hear his wife being assaulted and shouted for help. He then overheard one of the attackers say, "Don't worry, it will all be over in a couple of minutes." William managed to free himself and crawled to the basement stairs, eventually making it to the backyard. Joshua went to check on William but discovered that he had escaped. In her confession, Stephen mentioned that while Joshua was assaulting Jennifer on the living room floor, he entered and revealed that William had fled. Upon hearing this, Stephen strangled Jennifer to death while continuing his assault on her. Soon after, William began shouting for help. His neighbor, unable to recognize him because of his injuries, called 911. Realizing that the police would soon arrive, Joshua and Stephen decided to destroy any evidence. They poured gasoline on Jennifer's lifeless body in around the house, including the daughter's bedrooms. Investigators later found traces of gasoline on the beds of Haley, Michaela, and on the clothes they were wearing. Joshua and Stephen set the house on fire and tried to escape, not knowing that police had already blocked the road a few miles ahead. They crashed into a police vehicle, and within 5 minutes, they were surrounded by officers, pulled from their car, and arrested. They were quickly identified as former convicts. The fire in the house was spreading quickly. An ambulance arrived and took the seriously injured father, William, to the nearest hospital. Soon after, firefighters fought to put out the flames. When they put out the flames succeeded, they were met with a terrible scene. The first body they found was Jennifer, who was completely burnt with remnants of rope around her ankles. On the second floor, they discovered Michaela, who was tied to her bed and had been entirely trapped by the fire. Surprisingly, Haley had managed to escape her bindings and tried to flee but collapsed just a few meters away after inhaling too much smoke. William managed to free himself from his restraints, leave the house, and crawled to a neighbor's yard for help. The neighbor did not recognize him at first because of his severe injuries. Both Joshua and Stephen admitted to the murders. Detectives reported that Stephen smelled of gasoline during her interrogation. Each suspect accused the other of being the leader and planner of the home invasion. Joshua also placed blame on William for the murder. In Joshua's diary, which was later presented as evidence, he referred to William as a coward and claimed that William could have saved his family if he wanted to. Stephen's trial started on September 13, 2010, with a jury composed of 7 women and 5 men. The defense claimed that Joshua was the main leader behind the crime. Conversely, prosecutors argued that both Joshua and Stephen were equally accountable. On October 5, after approximately 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Stephen Hayes guilty. The sentencing phase commenced on October 18, in which the jury was initially torn over whether to recommend life imprisonment or the death penalty. Stephen's defense claimed that life imprisonment without parole would be a harsher punishment. On November 8, the jury recommended a death sentence for Stephen on all 6 capital felony charges. Stephen had earlier tried to negotiate a plea deal for a life sentence, but instead, prosecutors sought the death penalty. On December 2, 2010, Stephen Hayes, the defendant, expressed his remorse for the pain he caused the Politte family. He mentioned that death would be a relief for him and hoped it would provide peace and comfort to those he had harmed. Judge John Blue sentenced him to death 6 times, along with an additional 106 years for other offenses. However, in August 2015, Stephen's death sentence was converted to life imprisonment after Connecticut abolished the death penalty. Joshua Komisarjevsky's trial began on September 19, 2011. His lawyers proposed a plea deal where he would plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence. However, the prosecutors were aiming for the death penalty, arguing that Joshua was a troubled individual who had been influenced by Stephen. On October 13, 2011, Joshua was found guilty, and on December 9, 2011, the jury recommended the death penalty. During sentencing, he expressed his shame and regret over the crime, asserting that he never meant to kill anyone. Judge Blue scheduled Joshua's execution for July 20, 2012, acknowledging his involvement in the crime. However, in August 2015, Connecticut abolished the death penalty, and Joshua's sentence was changed from death to life imprisonment, just like Stephen's sentence. The trials and sentencing of Stephen and Joshua marked a significant and troubling time in Connecticut's legal history. The severe nature of their crimes and the emotional toll on everyone involved, including jurors, revealed the difficulties the legal system faces in dealing with such heinous acts. William is the only person in the family to survive this tragic incident. After spending 4 days in the hospital, he was released to attend his family's funeral. Struggling with the guilt of not being able to save the lives of his wife and children, he founded an organization to support children and young victims of violence, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to aid there. Later, he joined the Republican Party and entered politics, eventually becoming a state representative.